Hi everybody and welcome back to another Legends of Runeterra video. We just barely got the newest cards revealed today. Spoiler season is always fun. It's fun to look at all these different cards. We got Captain Erika here. I'm pretty sure we're going to get a different slot. Oh wait. Oh, clean. Okay. Anyway, let's go ahead and start with the first card here. So a 3-drop landmark. So once again we are seeing these really kind of inexpensive landmarks being revealed, and I think it's kind of interesting because it's almost like they knew what was going to happen with the original ones, just that they were going to be too expensive, or maybe these ones were more expensive originally, but and then they decided to reduce them and make them a little bit more fair. But yeah, we're just getting kind of these reduced cost landmarks that are all almost coming out on turn 3. Which is just going to create a whole bunch more, I guess, effects with these landmarks. Like, I don't know, if you get a landmark on turn 5, a 5-cost landmark, it's just not doing enough for you. And these 3-drops are just seem a lot more refreshing, and they seem like they're just going to be able to do a lot more throughout the course of the game. You get more value out of it for playing it early on. You don't have to sacrifice so much tempo early on. So anyway, I'm a pretty big fan of them having earlier dropped landmarks. Alright, so 3 costs. The Grand Plaza. When an ally is summoned, give it +1/+1 and challenger this round. Alright, so this I think coincides pretty well with the elite package from Demacia, right? Because a lot of their cards are being buffed +1/+1. So you've got the blacksmith, and you have the Bannerman. All those cards are giving +1/+1, and this card is doing the same. Really, is giving your units +1/+1. Now that doesn't mean this isn't only, you know, like targeting elite cards, which is really cool. So you can put this in other decks. And this could actually work really well in other decks, because all of a sudden you're granting units challenger, which is pretty strong. It's just for the round. It's not permanent, but challenger in itself works well with a lot of different regions. This is very similar to the Scar Grounds. Is that what it was called? The Freljord card from yesterday, where we have a card that is also giving, I think is a give or grant. In any case, it's giving your units tough, which typically has been a Demacia exclusive card, or keyword. And we're going to be, and since you have a card that's granting your units tough that is in Freljord and not from Demacia, you're just able to pair a whole bunch of different regions all of a sudden around that keyword that you haven't been able to before. So like I said, with Vlad and Braum in Freljord, you could grant them tough when that really wasn't available to them outside of pairing them with Demacia. And so kind of that self-harm archetype all of a sudden has another like lens that you can play it through, which is really cool. Alright, so the Grand Plaza here, kind of the same thing. We're granting challenger, and you can pair this with other regions that don't really have challenger with them. So for example, Shadow Isles, you want like your ephemeral units to die, right? Or the Undying. Not typically, but we see it paired with Demacia pretty often, and now more recently Bilgewater, the Undying deck. But this all of a sudden is giving them +1/+1 for the round and challenger. So you're able to kind of, suicide them into some heavier units, which is pretty cool. Yeah, you could use this with ephemeral units, cheap ephemeral units that you can put down, granting them challenger. Yeah, and then just being able to kill units pretty efficiently. So when an ally is summoned, it says, so that counts as played too, doesn't it? Am I misunderstanding that wrong? So I think it covers played and summoned units, if I'm understanding that correctly. So I think this is a pretty strong card, and I really like the utility that it gives to regions who don't automatically have challenger. It seems like a fairly balanced card as well. You still have to put it down. It's still taking up a board space, and you still have to sacrifice tempo for it. So I kind of like the direction of this card and where it's going, and it seems like there's a lot of decks that you could also build around it, which is pretty cool. Yeah, it works with Shadow Isles, it works with Overwhelm heavy decks. Yeah, just pretty big fan of that card, to be honest. Alright, let's go on here. So there's Captain Erika, I'm guessing is how you say the name, and we're going forward. Alright, let's see, an 8-cost elite card. So just as I was saying, the kind of elite synergy, so this looks like it's, you know, looking for more elite synergy. She has Spell Shield, a play, so this is a play effect, so it can be interacted with, so she can be killed by, you know, if they're able to get past their Spell Shield and use, you know, Vengeance or something. Or denied, so this can be interacted with. So she captures a unit or a landmark. Alright, and you aren't even subject to capturing. You could capture your own unit if you wanted to. Like, I don't know why you would want to, but you could. Which is kind of interesting. So any sort of play effect unit, like you could capture it, and then I guess even with the plaza, the Grand Plaza, she could have Challenger. You could suicide her into another unit and then have the play effect go off again for the unit that was captured. Just kind of like an interesting interaction. So yeah, you can capture your own unit. You can capture, I think, your own landmark as well, if you really wanted to. I don't really know why you would do that. There hasn't really been any, you know, usually you want your landmarks out, but you could. Yeah, and you can capture any enemy unit as well, which is pretty powerful, especially if they're in late game and you need to, you know, dispose of a unit that's going to win your opponent the game. It's going to be really hard to get rid of the Spell Shield and through her 6th health. So pretty strong card, I would say, if you're in kind of a late game meta. 8 cost is pretty expensive. I don't really see there's like a lot of 8-cost cards in the game that don't see a lot of play in general, especially in Demacia. There's a lot of kind of expensive cards that we really don't see. And this is probably going to fall into that category as well. I don't really expect her to make it into decks unless she is teching for a specific meta where we're at late game and we have to get rid of a unit somehow. Yeah. 8 cost just seems a little bit too expensive to me, so I don't really expect this card to be super powerful. There's other 8 cost cards like Tiana Crown Guard is a pretty good card. She's 8 cost, I believe, and her stat line's quite a bit better, and she rallies. I don't really see this card fitting into many decks, at least to start out. Could be wrong, but that's kind of how I see it. All right, let's keep going. Next card, alright, the Evershade Stalker. So they actually ended up making this little guy a card, the Stalking Shadows guy and the Encroaching Darkness, actually into a card, which is interesting. So this is an additional Nightfall unit, which, yeah, I mean, you probably have heard other streamers, you've heard myself talk about it. Nightfall and Daybreak themselves are very underwhelming play styles just because there isn't a lot of variability in them. The decks have almost been made for you. The most efficient deck type in those play styles, Nightfall and Daybreak, they basically are already made the most efficient way to play them, and there's not a lot of variability because there aren't a lot of cards. So introducing new Nightfall cards is always welcome, and yeah, I really like the idea of adding more variability. So Evershade Stalker, this is ephemeral, this is fearsome, and this unit cannot block. So Nightfall, create a copy of me in hand. Alright, so you're almost always going to be able to, and under any circumstance, you're going to be able to perpetually get more Evershade Stalkers. The only situation where you would not get more Evershade Stalkers is if you, for some reason, if this card could block, it can't even block, if you needed to play a card before your opponent attacked, right? In order to block the damage. But this card can't block, it doesn't matter, so you can just take your time anyway. And yeah, you can pretty much, depending on how your deck is built, always get this Nightfall ability off and get another Evershade Stalker in hand, which is kind of interesting. And of course, it's already ephemeral, so this is supposed to combo well with Encroaching Darkness. The one, I guess it's a copy. Create a copy. Okay, it's not an exact copy though. So even if you do use Encroaching Darkness, it should come back as an ephemeral 2/2. in your hand after using Encroaching Darkness. So at least that doesn't compound, as far as I can tell. It doesn't say exact copies, so if you do use Encroaching Darkness, it should be a 2/2 back in your hand. This is actually a very interesting playstyle in my opinion. Just because you can create more and more. This is interesting because it's creating more and more Nightfall procs, and so this combos well with the other Nightfall cards, especially the Dusk Rider. Dusk Rider is a very underwhelming card. It's a 5-drop that gets an additional attack stat for each time you've activated Nightfall. This is almost a card piece, a combo piece meant to make the Dusk Rider more powerful. And it's not really seen a lot. This could be kind of interesting and could combo well in atrocity decks with the with the Dusk Rider. So a very interesting card, and I see some pretty good potential for it. All right, let's keep going. All right, Pesky Spectre, an ephemeral. This is a 0-cost card with a Last Breath ability. So this is going to be able to be produced by that, what is it? Is it the Shadow Isles card that produces the ephemeral unit? So keep that in mind. Last Breath, create 2 copies of me in the enemy deck. Oh dear. Okay, so he kind of reminds me of Nearly Headless Nick. It's kind of funny. So we're like spamming the enemy deck with useless cards is basically what this is meant to be. So I could potentially see this working well against mid-range decks that don't have a lot of card draw. If you end up putting a lot of useless cards in their deck that don't combo well with what they're trying to do, this could actually be a very good card. I would say to a lesser extent as well, it's going to affect like go hard decks, just because they're trying to draw a whole lot of go hards. So if you have the ability to put a whole bunch of these pesky specters in, it's going to slow them down a little bit. Just a little bit. The draw potential in those decks is pretty high, so they're still going to be able to most likely cycle through their deck and find the cards that they need, but it will slow them down just a little bit, which is kind of interesting. This also slows down meal decks, which is kind of interesting as well. So it's kind of a little counter to like hyper draw decks, as a counter to mid-range decks, and it's a counter to meal decks. So this could actually find its way into the meta. Depending on what decks are strong at the moment. And this actually has kind of a funny interaction. Like, there's ways to play this card that work well with Shadow Isles. Just because you're able to, you know, kill off your units and you get pretty good value with like Glimpse Beyond and drawing and card creation in Shadow Isles. So this could be pretty interesting. I kind of like the idea of this card. I know it seems kind of memey, but this is the kind of card that makes me think of decks that I could potentially make with it. This is kind of like similar to the Stony Protector from the last expansion. Alright, 5-drop burst speed spell from Targon. This is Moonlight Affliction. So 5 cost. Silence 2 enemy units this round. Alright, so this is a 5 cost. So if you were to do 2 hushes, right, that's 4 mana at burst speed. This is a 5 cost, you're silencing 2 enemies at burst speed for the round. So not a permanent silence, so very similar. But this also has a Nightfall ability attached to it that says they can't block this round. Now, I think this is actually a pretty strong card. This is silence 2 enemy units. This is not 2 enemy followers. This includes champions. And then if you have activated Nightfall, those units can't block. So once again, we're adding more Nightfall cards. I've already talked about this a little bit. More Nightfall cards means more variability in how you play Nightfall. Does this combo super well with Nocturne? Or like probably not, just because he's using Fearsome anyway. And so a lot of times the enemy can't block, but it's giving you more Nightfall procs. And this doesn't even need to fall into a Nightfall deck in order for this to hit hard against certain deck styles. So yeah, you get to late game and you have some enemy blockers that are trying to, and champions too, right? You can silence these champions that are going to be able to block your cards. All of a sudden they can't block, right? And they're silenced. This I think is actually a pretty strong card from Targon. And could fit very well in certain decks. And this is almost like a late game finishing card. A burst speed spell, I think this is actually a pretty powerful card. just they can't block this round, and you get pretty good value out of the silence. You get to late game. This is pretty strong. This kind of allows for units as well if you had this card in your deck that don't necessarily have things like Overwhelm, if you're going to be able to hit the Nexus without the enemy having units to block. So just keep that in mind. Typically in a late game situation, heavy statted units that don't have, keywords that are going to finish off the game are very useful. But this almost allows for that, which is super interesting. You could get 2 of these cards in your hand at 10 on round 10 and use them both. It's pretty strong. Pretty strong. Burst speed, so you're able to do it even before you attack. The enemy isn't going to be able to react to it, and you're good to go. Alright, let's go on. Oop, okay, another Daybreak unit. So, similar to Nightfall, we get more Daybreak units. This is a 4-drop from Targon Solari Sun Forger. Daybreak, give me lifesteal this round. So just a temporary, well, he's got a decent stat line. 5-4 is a pretty decent stat line for a 4-drop. Yeah, not too bad. This is probably just a little bit above average, and you're getting lifesteal on turn 4. I don't really know how I feel about this card. So the main issue that I have is that it's a 4-drop. So who takes up the 4-drop card in Daybreak decks? You guys probably all know that's Leona. And so if we're saturating our deck with other 4-drop cards, and there's a chance between playing that and Leona, right? And I think they realize this. This is why this is a 4-drop with a higher stat line. Is that if you have the choice between this and Leona, you're going to play Leona every time. You're going to wait till turn 5 before you play the Solari Sun Forger, right? So that kind of averages out his stats. Are you going to include this Daybreak unit outside of a Leona deck? Probably not. Just because he has no other synergies with other decks. So something like the Eclipse Dragon, for example, which is a Daybreak unit, or even the Solari Shieldbearer, has other uses outside of just being with Leona. The Solari Sun Forger, I guess he can tech against super aggressive decks with his lifesteal. But that's almost only going to be on the, I mean, it will slow down the enemy. So I guess there are some situations that you could play this without having Leona. But for the most part, I'm going to say that this is probably a little bit subpar. I don't like the 4-drop, but I mean, what can you do? Lifesteal is pretty strong, and he could make it into certain Targon decks that doesn't have Leona if you're trying to tech for aggro decks. So, alright, let's keep going. Plus, you can reactivate Daybreak in some situations, so maybe he is a little bit better. Alright, 5-drop, Targons Peak, another landmark. So, okay, so what this is telling me is that for these landmarks, what they're wanting to do is create multiple cards. Landmarks for these regions, one that's going to be a little bit more expensive and one that's less expensive. So we got Star Spring as a 2-drop, Targon's Peak coming down on turn 5, so another 5-drop landmark. You guys all know how I feel about 5-drop landmarks. The good thing about this though is that in Targon, I don't think, are there any champions that are 5-drop right now? I mean, I guess Zoe could be, but what do we got? We got Diana on 2, we have Sirach at 3, Leona and Tarek at 4, and then Aurelian Sol on turn 10. So as of yet, there's no 5-drop champion from Targon. So this synergizes a little bit better with Targon than the other 5-drop landmarks do. Round start. Reduce the cost of a random card in each player's hand to 0. Alright, so this is specifically meant to be built around decks that have expensive units. So we are subject to a little bit of RNG, but this could be really good against, well, aggressive decks. So I think the Sun Forger is making a little bit more sense now if this is meant to be a counter to aggressive decks, which could be kind of interesting. Yeah, so this card makes you basically build a whole bunch of decks that have expensive units in it with the chance of reducing a random card in each player's hand. So this is champions, this is spells, even landmarks. It looks like random card in each player's hand to 0 this round. So you can get pretty good value, but this could also screw you over in a lot of cases as well. So yeah, like you accidentally give your opponent a 0 cost Captain Perrin or something on turn 8, or a, you know, like there's a lot of ways that this could screw you over. I don't know that I don't think this is going to make it into a meta deck. This is most likely meme status. If you build, like, the chances of it hitting you more than your enemy are going to be greater just because you have the ability to create a deck around Targon's Peak, but the chances of it hitting a good card for the enemy, I think, is a little bit too high to justify running this in a ranked game, and could lose you games in a lot of situations. So I'm not a super big fan of this card. It's interesting for sure, but I just don't like the randomness. You're reducing too much, like giving too much value to your opponent as well, I think. So anyway, reduce the cost of a random card in each player's hand to 0 this round. An interesting card, but I really doubt it's going to make it into any meta. So kind of an underwhelming landmark in my opinion, but could be fun to work around. All right, and that looks like it's going to be about it for today. I thought we were going to get a new champion tomorrow. It doesn't look like it. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and yeah, we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.